Welcome to Creative Distillation, where we distill entrepreneurial research into actionable insights. My name is Jeff York. I'm the Research Director for the Deming Center for Entrepreneurship at the Leeds School of Business here in beautiful Boulder, Colorado at the University of Colorado. And I'm here once again with my co-host,
Werner, and I'm the Faculty Director for Entrepreneurship at the Leeds School of Business also, Jeff. But I'm really excited about our podcast today. We have two amazing founders, local and not so local, that we'll talk about in a minute. And then I think that presenting a really, really cool paper that will be of great interest to our audience about, in a sense, dissecting new business models and talking about innovation in new business models. And hopefully we can shed some light, taking it from that academic tower that we talk about all the time down to the streets to see if we can help some folks.
Yeah, taking it to the streets, like Michael McDonald said, right, Brad? You know, is that Michael McDonald?
It is.
Yeah, there you go.
This guy with a face for radio.
I know my yacht rock. Yeah, I mean, this is by far our most ambitious podcast ever. We decided just to skip past having a guest and have three.
That's right.
Because, why not? And we've done very little to prepare, but still, here we are, and really excited. Today's topic, and the topic of today's paper, and what we were going to talk to our guest entrepreneurs about today was business model innovation and business models. Like, what the heck is a business model anyway, Brad, in your sense?
Well, actually, before we even get to business models, I think to talk about business models, if we can combine alcohol, chocolate, and CBD, we're going to be in a much better spot in our life for the understanding.
Well, maybe we'll be in a better spot in our life. I'm not sure.
True.
I'm not sure our clarity of explanation will be that enhanced, but we'll see. Right. Let's see what happens.
But back to your initial question, for founders and early founders, establishing and landing on the proper business model is a really difficult challenge.
Absolutely.
And I think it's an evolving challenge. And I normally talk to people that I'm helping, and even in my business, the very, very early stages of a new startup, you are an assumption searching for a business model. Mm-hmm. So I think to have Yuliya here to actually talk us through some of these techniques and findings that she's found through her research may provide some clarity and also some structure in identifying which model is appropriate, right? I mean, every business needs to make money at some point in the business, and we have two entrepreneurs here that can actually speak to that as well. Yeah. But bringing on the money is awfully tough. And sticking to models sometimes is very tough as well, because there is this traction that has to happen.
Right. As well as knowing when you need to change your business model and innovate. I mean, we see this, how many students? You probably teach twice as many students as I do in a given year. But right now, I think I have about 150 students, and I see their opening salvos and their opening teams and their business model assumptions, and trying to convince people that they need to change what they're doing is often very difficult. And so I think today I really enjoyed reading the paper we're going to talk about today, which is forthcoming in the Academy of Management Journal, which, Brad, is one of our premier journals in academia, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it. But before we do that, let's have our tasting of elements and introduce our guest entrepreneurs for this week. Or for this, I don't know, not this week, but this podcast, this week as well. So first up, we have Michael Keynes, who is the founder and lead chocolate maker and what is the name of your company again, Michael? I'm sorry.
Our main company is called Moksha Chocolate, and Moksha, Sanskrit word meaning freedom from samsara. But our overall project is called Chinao Cacao, which is our 501c3, which is based around the town of Chinao in Peru in the Amazon basin.
Wow, fascinating. So speaking of interesting business models, that is not what I expected you to say. So that's really, we definitely want to delve into that some more. And then we also have another entrepreneur here this day who's been kind enough to host us. Seth Johnson is the founder distiller. He told me to introduce him this way: the founder distiller and head janitor of J&L Distilling. So welcome, Seth. We're really pleased to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Boy, I didn't know what I was getting into here. You're reading into a lot that we actually, I don't know, Michael, did you spend a lot of time thinking about your business model when you were organizing your company?
Sort of more doing, but I suppose it's an evolving process.
Yeah, I don't think I really thought a whole lot about what business model it would end up being.
Really? So, like, you didn't, when you started off, you were just, what were you thinking when you started off? How did you get into the distilling business?
I'm no longer married, but I had a a wife who made more money than God, so I no longer needed to work for a paycheck like I had the rest of my life.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's kind of what allowed me to
So it's the
explore
freedom
this.
to just say, hey, I want to do something that I'm passionate about and interested in.
Yeah.
And this is where, and you started here in Boulder, right? You've been
Yeah.
here for 8 years.
Yeah, in the same location since 2011.
Fantastic.
An interesting fact about Seth is that he's a physicist turned distiller. And I love that. And talking before we started recording today, this was kind of a passion for Seth in his life to understand the process of distilling and all that. And I love the fact that you've taken something that you've really loved and was near and dear to you and have turned it into this business. And I think it's evidenced by the success of your products too. That type of passion has resonated through everything that you've done. So congratulations there.
Right.
Well,
And-
that's something that every entrepreneur has is, they have that authenticity. And I think identifying that and leveraging that to the fullest extent is kind of, it took me a while to figure that out actually, but that's your silver bullet that the big boys can't do.
That's right.
Especially when you make something that you and other people put in their mouth, whether it be a spirit or chocolate, that passion for that thing is something you created, from scratch with your own hands. So that's what makes it so meaningful. But bringing it to a business, bringing it to market, and that's a much harder thing that we could probably get some insights from you.
Yeah. Well, and we should introduce our third guest.
Yes.
Yuliya Snihur is a associate professor of strategy and entrepreneurship, correct?
Yes.
At Toulouse Business School in the south of France, and she is in town. She already gave a lecture at CU earlier today, and we were like, well, that's not nearly enough work. So let's take you out
do
to
more.
a distillery to sample CBD chocolate. And
That was a good value proposition.
Yeah, so we figured that's never a bad, a uniquely Boulder experience in many ways.
Very much so.
Being here on Creative Distillation. So let's sample some products. That's what we usually do on this part of the show, and maybe you guys can talk to us a little bit about what we're going to taste. And I'm really curious to learn more too, Michael. You said that your company is a 501(c)(3).
Well, yeah. So our the main part of our business originally was trying to find a way to bring products from our valley to market, but at the same time actually teaching the people in the community to actually become a business so that they could bring them to a port of destination, therefore capturing the full amount of the value of the asset in country, rather than the linear system of supply chain, where generally farmers are paid the least, and most of the money then goes up the grain loader, so to speak. So when we started with that, our intention was to try and find a funding model through charitable organizations.
Right.
But of course our products are commodity.
Right.
So we had to just realize, and so that was one of the first main pivots. So then I realized that I actually had to build a chocolate company in order to process potentially 20, 30, maybe 40 tons, which is the amount of chocolate that comes out of our valley, and at the same time facilitate that export model. So that's how we went about, and that was our first main change. But we've raised small amounts of money through our 501(c)(3). Like originally we raised some money from, I think, the Lush Group through one of their smaller grants, which built 25 to 30 fermentation chambers. So that was something that kicked us off originally. So there is money in the system, but unfortunately it's bound up in government contracts, mostly in our area, and the rest of it, of course, is in the actual commodity. So having a fully integrated system from the farm, from the farmers, right through to the consumers made most sense. So that's why now we produce this. There's 4 types of chocolate here. There's a 65%, which is a lighter chocolate, a 72%. They're all 2 ingredient. And then there's 2, this is a matcha flavored white chocolate, and this is a raspberry flavored. And these have coconut milk cream in it.
Wow.
So
no dairy in these.
No, we're a fully plant-based company. We've kept it that way, and we have to put a warning on all of our products that we process tree nuts, but it's coincidental that a coconut, which is not a tree or a nut, it's a fruit, is considered by the USDA to be a tree nut.
Yeah.
So we take that with great pride.
Fantastic.
Well, I actually take with great pride the social mission that you're doing
Yeah.
and trying to provide this value to farmers, which has normally been taken over by the larger processors and people down or up the food chain. How many individual farms are you working with in Peru?
So there's 65 in our valley. We're a very small valley that leads out of the Andes into the Amazonian plateau. So at the top of the valley is about 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet, and where we are is under 1,000 feet. So it drops quite precipitously, and then it becomes shortly after that area becomes the Amazon. So in our little part of the valley, there's about 200 farmers. There's currently 60 in our co-op. The more value we can bring to the product, the commodity from that, the more farmers we can append to our cooperative. So we use a 3-tiered system. Generally, it's $2 a kilo is the commodity price of cacao. We pay the farmer $2 a kilo, based upon their wet rate of the dried product. Yep. We pay them roughly $2 a kilo. We then also pay our cooperative $2 a kilo for the processing, and then we have another $2 portion which we keep in country. So if I have to use processors to get it to port, that is deducted from that part of the model, and if I get them to actually facilitate bringing it to port, they keep the whole lot. Wow. So basically I created an incentive to get them through and onto the taxation system, because that's the scariest part for certainly small freehold farmers. And these are all mine people, so they're talking about farmers of 5 or 10 acres.
That's fascinating. And how do you maintain quality?
So that's the most important part, is when you can actually pay someone for a job, meaning you actually employ them to do a process, you can put dictates on what you expect of them, when you're generally just saying, bring everyone together and do all this work, and in the future there might be some incentive that I could offer you. Generally, that's where you get very inconsistent quality. So we've developed an application which has 4 different layers, but the most important layer is what happens in the cooperative. So we have daily temperature testing, we have pH testing, we have cut tests that we do all the time on all different batches. But our transparency goes from 9 20-litre containers through to 63 kilos of cacao in a sack, and that's our traceability. So we can actually see where our chocolate comes from, how it gets to market, and we just use simple database collection tools.
And we better taste this real quick.
Yeah.
I got as many Michael questions all day, but I'm going to sit here and stare at the chocolate and until we eat it. So any particular order you would suggest for
this is the 65 is definitely more accessible. The 72 is darker and it's fruitier. Sure. And the 2 white ones, that's raspberry and that's matcha. So I'd say start here and find your way around, or start there and come around to this one.
I can do that. That's
okay, Jeff, go for it.
Yeah. No, that's Homer Simpson.
Yeah.
I will do this.
There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. She came all
I
the way
didn't
from
know that
France to
came
try
with
this.
perks from chocolate for this meeting, so I
Now,
will enjoy myself.
We're kind of making an assumption here as we talk about this that our listeners know what the heck CBD is and why we would want to eat it. Maybe you could explain a little bit about that, Michael, because I know in Boulder we just take it for granted, but
sure. But CBD cannabidiol is part of the endocannabinoid system, and the reason why particularly I put that into chocolate is because of the really amazing similarities between chocolate and the chemicals in chocolate. There's up to 400 different separate chemical agents in chocolate depending on fermentation. There's anandamide, there's which is what they call the bliss molecule, which is where they actually found, I believe, the endocannabinoid system originally from. So we find that the synergies between cacao and CBD are just so perfect as a story, and then the taste combination is again something quite unique.
It is very, very good.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And actually, I think it's really cool, the parallels about the 2 businesses that you have with both distilling and creating this chocolate product. And listeners should also know there are no federal bans on CBD through the U.S., are there?
So again, in the area of CBD as an edible, there's still a lot to go. But the CBD itself, we meet all the requirements of law when it comes to less than 0.3% as a concentration. So
as a threshold, okay, I understand.
So you'd have to eat probably a kilo of chocolate before you'd even get a buzz from smoking a joint of some description. So
right, and that's not the intent. The intent is there are a lot of really supposedly physical benefits from CBD to a human being, inflammation, those types of things. Correct?
Yeah, well, all the way that and again, when they talk about CBD, they talk about terpenes that come from plants, which are, flavoring and taste and smell agents that actually append to the endocannabinoid system through joining with CBD and CBG and other cannabinoids. So because of that, we just think that, like I say, the synergistic properties of the free, when I said anandamide, there's also reuptake inhibitors as well, which enhance the ability for the anandamide to actually work in the brain, which is why people feel good when they eat chocolate. So then adding all the potential analgesic properties of the CBD, it's just a fait accompli.
I think I need a dictionary to understand what
Bottom
line is, it tastes good.
A common thing in this industry is called the entourage effect.
Okay.
So it's just that the concept that this individual compound will do something to interact with your endocannabinoid system or other parts of your body to do something, but when you start adding all the other things that are present, they can enhance the things you're going after.
Right, just like whiskey would enhance the tasting of chocolate, as you gentlemen have found in the partnerships you've engaged in, right? Like you were talking about a Valentine's Day event that you've done.
Yeah, I believe it was Michael that came to me. I was a chocolate neophyte, and he really taught me to appreciate chocolate. And we had an event in which we paired cocktails with chocolates, and he had a very interesting array of very unique specialty one-off chocolates that he'd made for the event. And coming up with the cocktails was, I don't know if you want to call it work, but
but there was definitely a couple of afternoons where we got to sit around here and sample cocktails, and then I went back to work very warm.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Warm and motivated.
absolutely. Well, this is delicious.
It is delicious.
I mean, holy cow! And where can people find this chocolate? Where can they buy it?
So our Moksha products, predominantly a spa product. It's definitely aimed at the relaxation market. There's in the spa industry a lot of CBD massage going on because again of the absorption properties of that. So it's also definitely our normal chocolate here around Boulder, liquor stores and like Petty John's and coffee shops all over.
And could our listeners find you online to find out where they can buy this?
Mokshachocolate.com.
Could you spell that, please? Because I'm a little bit unsure of the spelling.
Moksha is Moksha and then chocolate.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Delicious.
probably didn't have very many problems getting the website.
So being in France, can I buy it from France?
You can. It's we can ship our chocolate anywhere. We can currently do that. So fingers crossed.
Have you done some international business?
Yeah. So the thing about at the moment, I think the UK is very, very crazy for CBD at the moment too. So we're in talks with a number of people that want to operate in Canada, in the UK. We're just not at that scale yet.
I was living in the UK 2 years ago. I actually saw that happen over time. I was living in some smaller towns, and you just saw more and more of the pharmacy windows and the chemist having CBD products predominantly featured. It really just took off. It's kind of amazing to see. And certainly here in Boulder, it's a big industry. Well, so should we taste any of J&L's products, or do you think
can do that ahead.
We'll end up on the floor if we do that?
Let's not go through them all, but
or we could just talk about it too. That's fine as well.
Well, I do have some available.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
Sure.
We were talking a little bit about what sets us apart. Our authenticity, and for me, my background as a physicist, I didn't plan on being a distiller.
Right.
So, I came out here to go to grad school in '96 and didn't start the distillery until 2011.
Wow.
So, for me, what I do differently than others is I bring a lot of science into that. I had to build all my own equipment because what I wanted to do, you couldn't just buy out of a catalog, because it all falls to the ethos of the company, which is that the craft of distillation is an art and a science, and at the intersection of the two is the true mastery of the craft. And so, that's a lot of marketing mumbo jumbo once the big boys get a hold of it and whatever, if it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
But for what it means for us is our products are very unique, and what it means for the vodka is my vodka doesn't have the bite that other vodkas have.
Okay.
That's technically challenging. It requires an enormous amount of energy in the distillation.
Sure.
And that's something the big boys won't do because of cost, and then the small guys can't do it because they also don't have the equipment that I have. So why don't we just taste the vodka?
Sure.
Perfect.
From there.
And I actually think that your authenticity is resonating because I see a bottle of vodka in the corner hanging with medals. So somebody is really validating your process and your vision.
Yeah, I've got mixed feelings about competitions, but it's really hard to evaluate spirits when you got to taste 100 of them in a day.
Sure is.
But everybody needs their medals for their marketing.
That's right.
Right,
So
right.
medals are better for that.
That's right.
And so, Seth, do you have we're here in your tasting room. Is this open to the public all the time? Can people just come in here and get a drink, or is it mostly your sales through retail?
Most of the sales are retail. In Boulder, tasting rooms are largely a vanity project. And I'm doing some renovations here, and
It's a beautiful
probably
bar
won't
top
open
we're
for a
sitting
couple
at.
months.
Yeah,
But yeah, we're still working on things.
it's beautiful.
And what about as a venue? Do you ever have are you available if someone wanted to rent this out for parties?
Thank you so
Something
much.
like that?
Currently, it would be I can't do that for that purpose, but we do a number of events for nonprofits.
Awesome.
So the way the permitting is now, I can't charge retail sales, so I can give away all the alcohol I want, but I just can't take money for it. So we've got
okay.
events coming up. We're actually putting something together for an event that's not going to be at this venue, which is the Chocolate Lovers Fling, and that's a benefit for the Boulder Safe House.
Oh, that's
and then I'm doing
fantastic.
another thing with Habitat for Humanity, and
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
and when are those events coming up?
next month.
Next month. Okay, so
Yeah.
hopefully we'll get this out by then and get
Well,
and promote that.
Yeah, if not,
we can.
there'll be more events in the future.
Fantastic. So I don't get any so I'm kind of a beer nerd and registered beer judge, so I always just whenever we taste anything I think of it like beer, but I think it's largely the same process, I always
Yeah.
smell stuff first. I don't get any hot heated alcohol-y
Sure.
kind of stuff off of this, like you were saying. It seems
Right.
not to have
When
that
people are
bite.
thinking vodka,
Right.
the alcohol itself is a very mild component, and it's all the other stuff that you taste.
Right.
Because the stuff that gives vodka its bite's detectable on your palate at parts per million levels, so it's
Wow.
really hard to get rid of. So the big boys won't do it because of energy, and the small guys don't have the equipment. But mine is also made from cane molasses. So that's very unique. Generally, you use what's local and cheap, and in America, that's corn. And corn, you need to add a lot of additional nutrients to get it to ferment appropriately. But with cane molasses, it's a superfood for yeast, so it keeps the yeast really happy.
Right.
And it's the yeast that produce the compounds that give vodka its bite. So, having a very rigorous distillation, and my still's a monster.
Right.
But, and also having a clean ferment is really what sets it apart.
Well, I
So
have to
thoroughly coat your tongue. Don't be
I have
shy
to tell you,
about
in
it.
all honesty, and I am a semi-professional drinker, and normally not beer, but with spirits, whiskey, vodka,
So
bourbon.
Brad's very happy this week.
This might be one of the best vodkas I've ever tasted in my life.
This is really
I think
nice.
it's really incredible. I've never had anything like this before.
Well, when you get rid of the bite, you can appreciate the underlying character of what's
There
in
are
there.
layers, Seth.
And it's very slight, but the cane gives it a little soft sweetness or floral sweetness.
All right, we getting a thumbs up over here? Yeah,
Right.
2 thumbs up.
Yes,
producer
even
saw
for
it.
me,
Yeah,
yes.
it's
I'm not a vodka fan at all. I come from Ukraine where people drink a lot of vodka, but I always was reluctant. But this one is very, very nice because I guess it doesn't have the bite, so that's the makes it
goal.
more accessible, I guess, to people who don't really drink vodka.
Yeah. Well, the reason that the bite's detectable on your palate at such low levels is because those are poisons to us, and we've evolved to be sensitive to it. I'd like to call it a hangover-free vodka.
Right.
And sometimes I do, but I always end that with.
Depends on what you
this,
mix it with,
This
right?
is not a legal statement.
Right.
Definitely get proved wrong.
Right.
What about drinking vodka today, Seth, at room temperature versus I keep my bottles of vodka in a freezer. Is there a difference? Am I doing it wrong? Is it just a wives' tale, or how would you say the best way?
A couple reasons to cool things. There's two main. The main one being that it does deaden the aroma. Not the taste, but most of taste is aroma. So you put it in your mouth cold, you don't get the aroma, so you don't identify those bite characteristics.
Okay.
So this in the freezer would basically be tasting like water.
Interesting.
But that also deadens the other things that you might want to taste. It also affects the viscosity. And not so much with vodka, but with gin, a lot of people put the gin in the freezer
Right.
to alter the viscosity, which I'm not sure how much I really believe that, because once you put it in a glass with ice and whatever, I mean, the temperature is the temperature,
Right. Either works or it doesn't, right?
Yeah, but unless you're just pulling and swigging it right out of the bottle, I don't know if the viscosity thing holds much water.
If people want to find this on the shelf, it looks like the label says snow on it.
Yep.
So that's we'll get that up on the video. But then you make other liquors as well, right?
Yeah, I make a gin, and then an herb that's also called snow gin.
Okay.
And then a European style herbal liqueur called Fire.
Wow.
The Europeans are kind of all over the place when it comes to making liqueurs. Like American liqueurs tend to be a single flavor note, where the Europeans add some of them can have 100 components.
Wow.
This does not have that, but it's got a bunch. The dominant flavors in that would be vanilla, clove, and cinnamon. We could taste that as well.
Well, if we must.
Let's go ahead and do that. So if you feel free to just...
our producer will start signaling us if we keep the tasting going for too long. But
that's right.
We can try.
Pass on that.
No. Hey, please. That would be great if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I really want to taste that. It sounds interesting.
On the ground.
For people listening or watching, this is worth a stop in Boulder. This is really, the product so far is incredible, both in the chocolate and in the the spirit. So I'm really just thrilled to be here, and thanks for both of you guys.
Yes, thank you
for
very
joining
much,
us.
And really interesting business
Thanks.
models too. Like, I mean, it's we didn't tell these guys we were going to talk about business models, and I think the fact that we didn't, yet they both have described, in my mind at least, very unique aspects of their business model that came from their own founder identity, their background, what they cared about, what they were interested in. I find that coming through in the products, and as we were talking about earlier, the authenticity of the products. This is not like drinking Absolute or some other big brand, high quality quote unquote vodka. It's a different product.
It's a different product, but it goes down great. And like I said, as a person that really loves spirits, congratulations! I thought it was just awesome.
You guys, this one smells fantastic.
I'd like to plug the industry in general.
Right.
Craft distilling is definitely exploding at this point, and in Colorado, I think there's a lot of other people doing a lot of unique things.
Very good.
And one thing that Colorado has is a Distillers Guild, and they put out a map which has all of the 61 distilleries on it, and you can go around and get stamps, and if you get 10 stamps, you get a free T-shirt. If you get all the stamps, you get 2 free bottles, and you're in drawings for 50 free bottles.
You haven't seen my bottom drawer.
So,
No.
Yeah. So it's really like
61.
if you want to put in a lot of hard work, if you want to call it that, you can visit all the distilleries
really
in Colorado.
cool.
And I've had people come through
we're
the
up for the
distilleries that have seen more of them than I have.
Is it a pretty tight organization? Are they helpful in outreach for you and resources and those types of things?
The brewers' organization for beer brewing is much stronger and better lobbyists, but we're small and growing, and we tend to help people out, and even the brewing industry does too.
Yeah.
View it as like, all boats rise.
So more of a
when we work
collaboration,
together,
right? Or collaborative.
to a certain extent. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Avery had a beer a few years ago called Collaboration, Not Litigation, because another company was making a similar style beer. I think it even had the same name.
That's right.
And they found out about each other, and instead of what we would normally expect, an onslaught of lawsuits, like, hey, let's brew one together and call it this. And I thought that epitomized, at least, not always, but definitely I've seen in the craft brewing and other craft markets here in Colorado and in Boulder specifically, people tend to try to collaborate, and as you said, a rising tide lifts all ships.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing about the beer industry. You'll see a guest brewer going to a brewery. The chocolate industry, not so much.
Yeah.
People in the chocolate industry think they hold these secrets.
Okay.
Really?
So they've come
That's
from
interesting.
very specific backgrounds, and they hold a very unique set of skills. And if anyone was to learn them, they would know the secret. And so they're very There's lots of people out there still that do teach, but it's not quite as much as I think the craft beer industry. I don't know necessarily about distilleries, but I just think that's a very big distinction between my world and Seth's.
Well, you keep people a couple shots, and they'll start talking about it.
Yeah, let's do that.
The alcohol does help.
It does.
Holy cow! This Fire, FYR.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Like I've never tasted anything like this.
And it's nothing like the festival, right?
No. It's already inherently more successful.
That's right.
I'm glad I didn't pay any money to be some sort of sponsor.
Oh my God!
Oh, no.
Oh my God!
Oh gosh, that would have been awful. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for the amazing samples, and thank you for sharing with us about your products and your companies. We've really enjoyed talking to you.
And Seth, where could our listeners and viewers find you online?
JLDistilling.com.
Awesome.
And yeah, we're in pretty much a lot of liquor stores around the state.
Great. Well, congratulations to both of you, and thank you for stopping in and sharing your stories.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, that was great. It was really interesting. We didn't tell either of those guys that we were going to talk about business models today. Yet I found both business models to be really interesting and actually linked to the topic of the paper we're going to talk about today, which I was not aware of because it is in press. It will be coming out in March, but you can access it at the Academy of Management Journal website. It's really nice that in academia, when papers are in press, they're actually more accessible than they are when they're published. Yes. It's pretty much open access right now. But the paper we're going to talk about is The Genesis and Metamorphosis of Novelty Imprints, How Business Model Innovation Emerges in Young Ventures. And the lead author of the paper is Yuliya Snihur of the Toulouse Business School and University of Toulouse in France, along with her co-author, Christoph Zott at IESE Business School in Barcelona. And we are fortunate enough to have Yuliya with us, as we introduced earlier. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to Boulder to give a talk, but also to meet very interesting entrepreneurs and to see this cluster of distilleries and chocolate makers that I'm finding fascinating. So thank you also to make me discover other things that I haven't any idea about.
Well, that's what we always try to do on Creative Distillation. We're trying to go out and find the more interesting businesses around town, and then gives us a good setting to try to talk about academic insights. And you know, I'm really glad to have a guest here because I've been trying to distill things down for Brad. I think I'm getting better as I go, and Brad is certainly more than capable of understanding any of the research I talked to him. But the question always comes back to, how do we tell entrepreneurs, or more broadly, entrepreneurs, investors, and a non-academic audience, like what's interesting in this paper? And I think I found it in this paper. Like, to me, this paper spoke loud and clear, much more so than much of my own work. Like, in fact, I plan to use it in class this coming Monday, but it's your paper, Yuliya. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how it came about, what you were trying to do, and then how you think it's useful for entrepreneurs or others.
So this is a paper that comes from my dissertation work, where I followed several companies, and I was originally interested to understand why some companies launch innovative business models. And I looked through many local companies and then chose some that I found more innovative and others that were less innovative. And the end result of this, that I didn't think that would happen at the time, was me following these companies for many years, which ended up being 9 or 10 years.
10 years following these companies.
Over time, yeah, and that resulted in this paper, trying to look at the process, and over time realizing the strong role of the founder imprinting the novelty part on the innovative companies, which was in the research talk. This was a bit counterintuitive, at least for me, where imprinting usually is associated with a lack of change. So you imprint something. It's a stamp. You stamp it on a company, or you stamp it on a duck in biological terms, or you stamp it on, let's say, a PhD student that works with an advisor and is imprinted strongly by what the advisor says.
Sure, we see that a lot.
And then the counterintuitive part here was that the innovative companies, they kept innovating. And so over these several years that I followed them, they kept introducing new things. So for me, that was frustrating in a sense, because I thought that's what their business model was. And then a couple of months later, I would come back and they would tell me, we have changed it. Now it's something else. And I was a little bit worried in the beginning, thinking, what does this do to all of my research setup?
I invested 5 years in following these people, and now they're changing what they're doing.
Yeah, but then the insight came after years of thinking, of figuring out, okay, where do I go with this? That actually the imprinting part was imprinting the novelty by the founder giving the company, the employees, an incentive incentive to keep changing, to keep innovating. And that was the insight that made this paper work in a sense, or that came to me later, that came to me after finishing my PhD. And again, so this is more academic side. I'm not sure I'm talking to the practical entrepreneurship side here.
So it's very, very interesting to me. And I think business model and discussion of business models is incredibly relevant to entrepreneurs. And I am here, though, to represent how would this actually help someone that's starting a new business. And through our previous discussion with these two really cool entrepreneurs, you heard one of them say that they loved the business and got into the business and then decided they didn't have a business model in mind. And then as the business evolved, the model evolved. And I think that that's actually very common with young entrepreneurs and new companies and innovative companies. So kind of how do you reconcile those two things, Yuliya?
Well, the changing the business model in the entrepreneurial education, there's a lot of push today towards this question of pivoting and experimenting and quickly changing. And that's part of what my paper is about, that the business model is not fixed but has to be updated. But again, I'm not sure I'm trying to say that you should change your business model all the time either. Because there are moments when it's needed and moments when maybe it doesn't make sense to change too much either. So from my research, I mainly look at the novelty aspect compared to what happens in the industry. And the interesting part about the business model innovation from these founders was that they not only thought about their own industry, how it functions, who are the players, how do I fit with these different players, but also they try to figure out what happens outside my industry, and getting ideas from outside the industry helped them to come up with a business model that was new enough to get enough bargaining power with other players to position the company well enough.
Let me just stop you there for 1 second, because now I'm going to totally agree with you. Understanding your industry.
This is a first.
It doesn't happen that often.
Never happens to me. Congratulations, Yuliya.
But understanding how your industry functions is of vital importance to a new entrepreneur, and also having this open-mindedness to what's going on in the industry, I think are really, really important factors, which you identified in your paper. And then also the other thing, talking before we were sitting down here, is looking at other industries as well. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we talked with Seth here, and he mentioned his question about working with distributors and how he should interact with them. And I think part of the story here is for the entrepreneurs, it's maybe not so obvious to figure out what is the best position in the industry and how to find the twist that will help them to make money in a difficult spot where you're a new player and you don't have much with you. So this, first of all, understanding the industry is probably the first part, but
Agreed.
Second, getting inspiration from somewhere else that will give you some ideas to do things slightly differently, or even in big ways different from the other players might be helpful. So learning from beer industry, for example, or learning from somewhere even further away for Seth might be interesting approach to take to this problem, let's say, of what next steps to take.
Right, and that creativity could actually provide a long-term sustainable competitive advantage, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that. But again, it's innovation not necessarily only from the product side. So here we have talked a lot about product innovation, so introducing CBD-based chocolate, and this is definitely innovative. But then the question about how do I distribute it and how do I organize my business around it is also relevant. And my point would be that innovation can come from both products, but also from the business model side.
Right, and this is something we struggle with a lot in teaching entrepreneurship. So, the classic, when I started doing it, it's like you basically tell people who don't have a patent, well, you don't have a defensible competitive advantage. Sorry.
Right.
And then the close second place would be, oh, well, you just get to scale really fast, and then you have a dominant brand and you get acquired. Yeah. But I think, okay, those are both great if you have them, but kind of very difficult things to do. I think what I like about this research is it points at the idea that, and this paper, to be clear, and feel free to straighten me out at any point, it's not saying, hey, business model innovation is the thing you should do all the time. But there are prior studies that suggest, now business model innovation, I'd say that's been studied for maybe 10 years. So in terms of academia, it's a baby. But, there is, and I think we all just kind of intuitively know that a business model innovation can lead to competitive advantage in many situations. Not always, but to me, it's something we can teach, right? It's something we can tell students and tell burgeoning entrepreneurs, hey, thinking about how business models from outside your industry can be applied in your industry would allow you to differentiate and perhaps reduce your overall cost, or maybe increase the price you're able to charge, or differentiate your product in a crowded market. All those things.
Customer connections, so many different things. And I also look at, and Yuliya and I talked about this earlier, about new startups are actually they're an idea searching for a business model. So early on, you may not even have a clue on how you're going to monetize whatever the heck you're doing. And so, but somewhere you have to, right? And so how does that kind of fit into your research in the evolution of a business, coming up with an idea, and then doing this research, understanding the landscape, both within your industry and maybe looking at novel ideas outside of your industry? How would you say that kind of process flows?
Yeah, there's definitely learning in the process. So in all of my cases, I saw the entrepreneurs, the founders learn. But there was also a part that was interesting to me was the selection of other employees that were like-minded than the founder. So there were several of the early employees that, selection by the founder, selection by the employees that joined the project that, had a strong influence from the founder on how to function and where to bring this company. And so this, let's say, collective learning in a sense led to some companies being much more innovative over time, not only because the founder was willing to do that, but also because the employees took the founder as a role model to try to behave in the similar way with their teams.
So setting of the culture early on.
Yeah, so in a sense, that's where we come back to this imprinting idea. So innovation is not a one-person game, or in a company, that's something that has to be nurtured, and often the founder can be a role model for the team to follow up or not in those footsteps. So in my innovative cases, that's what happened. And in cases that were not innovative, again, it's coming back to Jeff's point. Not every company will innovate the business model, and that's fine. And in the cases that were less innovative, the employees were more focused, for instance, on being as efficient as possible, and that also gave an advantage to the company in the space where they were, but with a different focus, let's say. And that's where the imprinting was important, from the founder and selecting these early employees to influence where the company goes.
And part of your research also touches on strength of personality.
Well, I'm not sure it's strength of personality, but it's more in terms of cognition of how the founder does things that is reflected, or especially in these early experiences. So early on, when the first employees join, they seem to often take part of the behaviors of the founders in their own DNA, let's say.
Okay.
So I'm not sure it's the personality. It's more in terms of, the founder tries to...
A presence? Even bigger than that, right?
Well, it's more cognitive. So it's cognitive in terms of thinking outside the industry, and the founder brings examples outside the industry during the meetings, and then the employees will also start to get those kind of behaviors. So I wouldn't say that it's personality. It's more the type of kind of thinking.
So is it licensed to fail, in a sense that try these things? Or am I overthinking this?
You're overthinking.
Okay, good. Oh, thanks. That's why we do this at a bar.
No,
right?
It's absolutely no. But I think what you're driving at, is this. So if you go back in the, I'm gonna try not to get too academic. You can just kick me if I do, Brad. But if you go back to the prior literature on imprinting, the basic idea is, look, the founder did some things, and they were this really powerful personality, and then that holds through the organization, and it carries through even after the founder is gone. These are kind of early theories, and what I think is really interesting about what Yuliya and Christoph have found here is that it's not that simple. It's the founder does have that impact, but also when they recruit people who think similarly to them, when they are a more active role model and mentor to those first hires early on, that's how this happens. And they refer to that as cognitive imprinting versus structural imprinting.
I love that you just brought up that term mentorship, though, and I think that actually is very
It's a big
relatable.
mechanism in the paper.
Yeah, and it's a big mechanism in real life too. So I think
but that's why I didn't agree with your personality side, because I don't think it's really about the personality. It's more about the behaviors and the thinking that. It's not that I will have the same personality as the founder does. That will never happen. But you can get influenced by the type of behavior the company has. So if every 2 weeks we have a meeting where we think about how more innovative we might be, well, that will reflect on how the employees also behave.
Right. And it's a great practice. So that's a great practical practice as well. So I love it that you said
and it highlights like some of the things you found about founders getting integrated into the way a company operates. So there's basically 3 mechanisms here I love in this paper, because I'm like, hey, it's always 3, right? And for students, they love it when there's 3 things, right? So we talked about the first one, engaging in industry spanning search versus industry focused search, right? And so a lot of times our students get so focused on, let's say, the beer industry, right? I know everything about the beer industry. I'm like, that's great. So does every other brewer in town and in the country, right? And that's still in business. So let's start thinking about totally different industries that students may be aware of that, I mean, you know, I'm old, so I can say this, that us older folks may not be aware of. Like, oh, hey, I can leverage TikTok to get my beer out there through viral videos featuring a local celebrity. I mean, that's not going to occur to me, right? It's a very different way of thinking about it. The other aspect, though, I wanted to talk about, the complex system thinking style versus internal efficiency thinking style. I think that really relates.
Okay, wait a second.
Okay, hold on. No, I'm going to get to it. I promise. I'm going to distill it down.
Okay.
I haven't had too much CBD yet.
Okay, good.
I had to eat a lot more than that. No, but if we were having meetings, right, and our meetings were focused on, let's think about how what we're doing relates to other industries here that we know of, or other businesses that we might partner with. Thinking about partnerships. That's a really different meeting than, hey, you guys, you were less efficient last week and our costs are going up.
Right? Yes.
I mean, and that's kind of intuitive, but this paper brings it out. I've never seen that before, of like how we think about what we're doing as entrepreneurs.
Well, I think it comes also from the following these companies and being present there, looking at how the meetings really work in the companies. That's something that shocked me, or like that I was surprised seeing the differences in terms of what kind of meetings the 2 different types of companies had, and where efficiency was much bigger issue, or the for the managers and the founder in one set, and it's not that the other types of companies didn't pay attention to efficiency, but the thinking was different. So the cognition again was focused much more on figuring out really how things work in the industry and where the leverage could be found with different participants, and who are the partners, who are the competitors, and should we maybe even shift in who our partners and competitors are. So this was one of the companies that was in the mobile payment, and originally they thought they were developing a platform for merchants and customers, but then they realized maybe we're developing a platform that works for banks, and that was a very different way to think about what their business was. And the meetings were more about reframing what actually are we doing, who are our customers, rather than thinking about what is the most efficient way to be a platform for paying merchants.
Right.
So this shift of realizing that we can be many different things, I think, is important for innovation in general, and business model innovation in particular.
Absolutely,
I totally agree.
So the other aspect.
Have you convinced?
Yeah, well,
we did.
We're at 1 point, yes.
Hey, 2 points. And I think that actually ties into a lot of the shift in the entrepreneurship literature away from traits and into process. And what I mean by that is, like, if the pretty much everything we thought we knew about certain types of people are good entrepreneurs and other types of people aren't, that's sort of all been debunked. I mean, in a sense of I can show extroverts are good entrepreneurs, and then I can also show in another study it doesn't matter at all. If I want to be really misogynist, I might say, oh, well, men are better entrepreneurs than women, or some nonsense like that. Turns out that's not true, shockingly. But even things like, oh, I'm more risk tolerant, things that and people still believe this. really great entrepreneurs don't think they're risk tolerant. They don't think they're taking on any risk at all. They don't. They don't particularly think in that way. And what I love is getting away from like, oh, well, you got to be this type of person, but rather these are steps you can take if you want to have business model innovation. If you think that's important in your industry, then these are some steps you can take.
Right, so transferable skills.
Exactly. And that's what I really like about this work in this paper.
Thank you. So originally we had a table of what leads to business model innovation that had these clear steps, but the end result of the academic work was that this table
we get rid of all that, right?
And do you have can you talk to us about your biggest surprise personally through your research? Was there one moment or one component that stood out to you?
I think this third part where I mean, for me, from reading a lot of innovation literature, I was expecting that there would be a lot of this participative decision making, and innovation will come from co-creation, etc. But the end result was usually in these innovative companies that I followed, the founder took the decision and said, "Okay, we go in this direction," and that was unexpected to me. So I found it very surprising where there was this creativity, but on the other side there was someone who had to take a strong decision, upkeep this novelty in the business model at least. So I mean, again, I'm not talking to all innovation people. So if you want to develop an innovative product, maybe you don't need a strong power founder that says you should do it this way. But in these companies for business model innovation, it seemed like a strong decision maker is needed. So this organic, decentralized decision making didn't really work well for business model innovation.
Right, and that can be terrifying for a young entrepreneur, because in a sense you have to make a decision. You cannot sit on the fence and just say, well, it could go this way or this way. You have to just say, this is the way we're going sometimes, and that's very scary, especially early on for younger people that are starting businesses.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was also curious, this strength of this imprinting. So the founders, even if they're young, they still do a lot of things that strongly imprints their team and their company, and that they might not realize at the time. So the more research I do on entrepreneurship, the less willing I am to start a company, because I realize, oh my God, there's so much that goes on during this moment of founding.
I so agree with that.
I totally disagree here, folks. Okay.
I need to disagree with that.
But it's not for everyone.
No, it's not. And I think when we try to teach entrepreneurship, I mean, I think it's quite irresponsible actually to be like a cheerleader for entrepreneurship. I mean, like, oh, you guys should all be entrepreneurs and we'll measure success by how many of you launch a business. I mean, I'm not actively starting any businesses right now, and I don't really want to. And I mean, and it's funny, I started to move my classes and my teaching much more towards a competition where people were allowed, they didn't fail the class necessarily, but their venture could absolutely fail in the class, and it'd be very clear signals to the point where I have to have tissues for the tears in the office about this. Right. And they're like, oh my God, I never ever want to do this. I'm like, that is actually a wonderful lesson for you to learn.
Well, but it's not all about starting businesses, even though we're talking about business models here, right? Entrepreneurship to me is just a creative way of thinking. Right, and now we're talking about a subset of those creative thinkers that now want to launch something.
Sure, I think of it more broadly as, in the words of Herb Simon, there's a science of the artificial. I mean, it's how we bring artifacts into this world.
Right.
And what I think this paper does that I just love is it takes something that we really don't understand much about. Everybody's like, business models, a lean canvas, and let's talk about your business model. But we don't know anything about where the good ones come from, or the innovative ones, I should say. Because there's no, that's the thing with qualitative research, I think. It lets you get at mechanisms that we wouldn't uncover otherwise, but it's not the same as going out and like, hey, we did a survey, we studied 3,000 entrepreneurs and we track them on all these survey metrics, and we can say these things statistically are likely. It's a different kind of thing.
Yes.
In my opinion, oftentimes much more interesting.
Well, it gets at the process of how things happen, but then the
how and why.
Generalizability is definitely the problematic side of this. So I can say this happened in these 3 companies, and I'm pretty confident that this could be happening again, but then again, this is where we put a lot of caveats on the academic research.
That's right.
And,
one shoe doesn't fit everyone.
But again, this is a method to get at the nitty-picky details of the role modeling or the mentorship or the what kind of meetings do these companies have, which is things that we don't really know that much about in entrepreneurship. It's for me, the fascinating part is the question of design, or how do the entrepreneurs design the business models. So it's about artifacts, but it's also about this agency of entrepreneurs designing really social systems, and not only new products, but also impacting employees, impacting people they work with or around. So that's and for me, looking at those processes is interesting.
Right, and it's very interesting to me, actually, and I love the passion that you bring to this as well. I can tell that you really believe it and love and really embrace what you're doing. Is there a next step from this paper? Do you have your eyes set on another piece of research moving forward?
Well, yes, it's in research we always have many projects, and the more I work in research, more projects I seem to have around me.
Always expanding VC portfolio.
There you go.
Yes.
Where things don't fail, they just hang around like forever.
But this question of how business models change and a question of pivoting is something that is we were talking about this morning is fascinating to me, and I think we don't know that much about what goes on between the company started and success.
That's right.
On the entrepreneurial side, that's very much what I look at. But other things that I do in terms of business models, I also often look at industries where there is disruption happening and how the existing companies react to these newcomers that introduce innovation and bring these new business models that sometimes can have very strong consequences for industries. So this is the dark side of business model innovation, if you will, of the creative destruction that the old gets destroyed and has to change as well, and that's also very interesting to me.
What about identifying stakeholders in a business model? When you're contemplating a business model, thinking more about stakeholder and the wide universe of stakeholders versus shareholder return.
No, that's another very, very interesting part of thinking, and I think the stakeholder theory, this is very much represented in strategy and entrepreneurship research as well. So this is for me, I am also working on another project, and where we look at platforms. So we look at Airbnb or Uber, for instance, that introduce new business models to an ecosystem, to a society, and then there are several negative externalities to stakeholders. For instance, in Barcelona, where the neighbors, they have to deal with the noise, and then the apartment prices go up, and this new business model that makes money for the shareholders, well, for the community, it has positive and negative consequences.
Right, and the government may step in, and there can be some regulation and all those other things that then follow.
Yeah. So that's, some of the research that Jeff has been doing as well on the social movements and how the community can react also negatively to new business models. To me, this is an interesting thing that I'm playing around or thinking about how from the company perspective, how do you adjust your business model to these negative externalities that it might have on the community? And that's to me not so obvious, because the answer is you should be innovative, etc. But how do you take into account the
easy
neighbors
to say,
or
right? Hard to practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I'm just getting ready to go help kick off our social impact track of the campus-wide entrepreneurship competition. And what they've asked me to talk about is not to talk about triple bottom line or sustainability, but a stakeholder approach. And they're actually trying to judge the social impact track this year according to a stakeholder approach. So it's really interesting to see this concept catching on, and not that stakeholder has already. I mean, it's been around.
It's
for a long
been
time.
around for
but
40
in
years.
Academia, it's a handful of papers in the business ethics literature, and that's kind of ironic too, because it was originally Ed Freeman wrote it as a strategy theory.
No, it's interesting, and there have been 3 papers or 4 in SMJ or in AMJ about this, but I find that there's much more we could do with this theory
Well,
in the business model world as well.
I think the
so,
next time that you're in town, we're going to focus on stakeholders. How's that?
Very good.
But thank you very much for coming in today. Hopefully, it was very informative for me. Hopefully, you shed some light on people working on their current ventures right now. So thank you. Pleasure.
And to live up to
Thank you.
my role here as distiller here, I want to make sure.
Okay.
So Brad, if you're starting a venture and you're seeking to have a more innovative, I can't speak, business model, you want to engage in industry spanning search, not just focus on your industry, but look more broadly.
Yep.
You want to engage in a complex system thinking style, meaning you think about multiple elements of the business and their interlinkages rather than just thinking about how to maximize your internal efficiency. And you want to have a dog on premises,
Of
for
course.
sure. That is always the way to do it. And you want to actually centralize your decision making around the founder and around leaders, rather than having a more broad and decentralized way of making decisions.
Let me add one takeaway in a practical standpoint that I actually am taking away is that a founder as a mentor to their team is extremely important.
Yeah.
Right.
It can be positive or negative.
It can be positive or negative. Hopefully, we're talking in the positive way. But I think founders need to think more about mentoring teammates and early hires than just. Yeah, they bring them in for certain roles normally. But beyond that, there is one extra step, I think, that will actually give you a much greater chance of success. And I think that's that mentoring component.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's one of my surprises as well, this strong role of a role model of the founder. So the employees really look up to the founder. The founder might want it or not, but they will have a role modeling perception from their different early stage employees in particular. So the founder has to be careful about these early first days, as well as what continues.
Perfect.
Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being here.
That was a
really
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.
It was
It
wonderful
was a
to
pleasure.
meet you, and really enjoyed the paper, and hope you enjoy the rest of your visit here in Colorado.
Nice conversation and very good tasting as well. So,
Yeah,
I'll
thanks.
remember that for sure. The CBD chocolates and the fire liquor that was.
That
wow.
fire liquor is really impressive.
And I think that
It's
we were
delicious.
successful in bringing to light some actual techniques for entrepreneurs today. So that's great.
Hey, all right.
Yes.
Great note. Thanks,
all right,
man.
well, good to see you, bro.
Okay.
All right, thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Join us next time here on Creative Distillation, and we will next be talking in our next episode to the Dean of the Leeds Business School, Sharon Matusik, about some of her recent research, looking at the state of the field of entrepreneurship. So we're really looking forward to that. That should be a lot of fun, and we really look forward to hearing from her. So, all right, see you next
Thank
time.
you.
Thanks a lot.